Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Now, we left off with verses 1 through 3, which talked when Solomon says that he observed oppression. And I took a little liberties to kind of go into what he meant by that, how a modern day take on that would be critical race theory. And of course, I'm going to dive deep into the issue or subject of critical race theory, but more so how it is perceived. But again, I'm not going to go into that. And then we talked about when he says that he admires the dead. And I took a little liberty and went into it kind of explaining why that statement, and we see it throughout the Old Testament. And that is because, in a sense, the only tangible thing we have is what our physical senses. So our eyes, our hearing, smell, touch, taste. We contact the physical world around us. Okay? The physical world around us. And that's the only thing we perceive. And the reason why, think about this, it's interesting. One of the reasons why is because through Adam, we're dead to the spiritual realm. We're cut off from God, okay? So the only way we can know God is through revelation that God gives us, okay? And so the source of revelation is the Bible. So that's why we know that the heaven and the hell. That's why we know that the God, Jesus, angels, because God has given us that revelation. Okay. All right. So let's get back to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. I'm going to pick it up at verse 4. Okay. He says, I saw that all labor and skillful work is due to a man's jealousy of his friend. This too is futile and the pursuit of the wind. Another interesting statement. I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to a man's jealousy of his friend. Um, Look at verse 5. The fool folds his arm and consumes his own flesh. Verse 6. Better is one handful with the rest than two handful with efforts and the pursuit of the wind. You know what I thought about? I thought about this saying here. People said better is a bird in the hand or something. Anyway, I'm butchering that. I'm trying to think what it says. Better the dove in the hand, one in the nest. Okay, I'm butchering that because I shouldn't have. Verse 7, messed that one up. All right, he said again, I saw futility under the sun. There is a person without a companion, without even a son or a brother. And though there is no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. So who am I struggling for, he asked, and depriving myself from good? This too is fruitful and a miserable task. Now, kind of interesting, they talked about a person who, notice he says, doesn't have a companion or a son or a brother. And then he said, and so there is no end to his struggles. His eyes are still not content with the riches. That is kind of interesting. I told you too. I'm talking about Solomon being a rich man, certainly can speak on this level. We have a lot of people that are rich that we see in the news all the time. It would be interesting if they was honest enough to answer, would this apply? Are they content? Especially those who are very rich but that are not married, they don't have kids, they don't have children, they don't have relationships. So would they admit that this is how they feel? He asked, so who am I struggling for? Other than the idea is who he is struggling for other than to be rich, but then he also says he's not content with his riches. Verse 9. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their effort. If either falls, his companion can lift him up. But pity but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Now, that's kind of interesting because I, I, I'm sorry I have to do this one, but when I hear but pity the one, I'm thinking about the old um, 1980s show with Mr. T when he says pity the fool. Okay, but verse 11 he says, and if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can a person alone keeps warm? And if someone overpowers the one, then two can resist him. A cord of three strands is not easily broken. So he kind of makes the case for companionship. Let me just say this now, and not only is he referring to marriage here, but he says two are better than one. Okay, in other words, just having two. Okay, so not necessarily only focusing on marriage, but just two. Friendship, it could be friendship, it can be marriage. Um, so uh, verse 13, because he says, but if two attacks, at least you got two to fight. I mean, he gives a couple of scenarios. Now, there are a lot of people who are loners, lonesome, being alone, and they probably can make a case, oh, I can do without it. Okay, verse 13. Better is the poor, but wise. Better is the poor, but wise youth. No, I'm sorry. Better is a poor, but wise youth than an old, but foolish king who no longer pays attention to warnings. In other words, better is a young person who has wisdom than an old fool. Okay. Verse 14, for he came from prison to be king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who move about under the sun follow a second youth who succeeds him. There is no limit to all of the people who were before them, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. All right, guys, I'm going to go to chapter 5. It said, guard your steps when you go into the house of God. Better to draw near in obedience than to offer a sacrifice as fools do, for they ignorantly do wrong. Now, of course, at the time the temple was built, and the temple really is the only house of God that you can legitimately say is the house of God. No church today, none, no church today, okay, it can be is the house of God. It is a church building. The people, the body of Christ, the church, are the people, God's people. That's the church. Okay, we say we're going to the house of God and refer to a church, and then of course we've made that kind of the object of reverence instead of what God is truly building, and that's a whole sermon in that. Verse 2, do not be hasty to speak, and do not be impulsive to make speech before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. Um, hmm. Now, okay. Verse 3, for dreams result from much work, and a fool's voice from many words. Now, it's kind of interesting here. If dreams result from much work. Now, that's kind of an interesting insight. If you ever notice a hard sleep after a hard day's work, or put it like this, or a hard workout when you exert your body. That's interesting. Um, all right, so I'm going to go back to verse 2 for a moment. He says, don't be hasty to speak, and do not be impulsive to make a speech before God. God is in heaven and you on earth, so let your words be few. Now, I'm going to say this. God hears your words. We don't always hear God's words, but God hears our words. That's why he says this. Don't be, and here's the thing. You don't need to give long speeches before God. God already knows your heart. Okay, so you don't know, you don't have to try to give him the snow job. All right. Look at verse 4. When you make a vow to God, don't delay fulfilling it because he does not delight in fools. Fulfill what you vow. Um, Fulfill what you vow. Better that you do not vow than that you vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth bring guilt on you, and do not say in the presence of the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry with your words and destroy the work of your hands? So, um, under the Old Testament law, if you make a vow, you were obligated to it no matter what the cost. Now, we have a story of that when a foolish king, not he wasn't a king, was a ruler, but, and he said, God, if you give me victory, I'll give you the first thing that meets us in an offering. He goes out, he wins the war, he comes back, and his only begotten daughter meets him. And she lives the rest of her life as um, unmarried. Okay. The idea of that he didn't have to even make the vow in order for God to give him the victory. He could have just simply asked God, Lord, give me victory, and God would have answered his prayer. And so we see it right here. Don't be quick to make a vow, but if you do, you are obligated to keep the vow. Verse 8. If you see oppression of the poor and perversion of justice and righteousness in the providence, don't be astonished at the situation, because one official protects another official and higher officials protect them. The profit from the land is taken by all. The king is served by the field. Now, it's interesting because isn't that politics today? How that what? You hear this term today of two-tier justice, and it is spoken by hypocrites, utter hypocrites, because it is actually the one that they are referring to that receives the lenient judgment, if judgment at all. In other words, they protect one another. Police protect police, right? When police do wrong, when judges do wrong, when officials do wrong, they protect each other. They're not supposed to, but they do. Verse 10. The one who loves money is never satisfied with money, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile. Now, here's the interesting thing here. I can't speak to this because I don't have a lot of money. In my mind, I said, well, I think I could be satisfied. But notice, until you have it. And certainly, if you think about this, what could you buy if you had money? Let's say if you had $30 billion. dollars. 30 billion. You won't have to live off a budget. $30 billion. So let's say you have a $500 million yacht. Well, at some point you get used to all of the opulence, and it's just a lot, a lot. I remember, and this was around 1985 when power windows and power steering and power brakes were becoming normal for cars. Actually, kind of before then, those things were actually optional, so that the standard car, you didn't have those power amenities. But I remember, man, they really kind of like, oh man, power windows, how great it would be. Well, so you get the power windows, and then what? You can only hit the switch, and then when it goes up, and go down. They get old right real fast, right? And because before you really had to use your hand to roll the window. But even now, okay, power windows, okay, that's fine. You hit the button, that's it. You get tired of it. Verse 11. When good things increase, the one who consumes them multiplies. What then is the profit to the owner except to gaze at them with his eyes? That's kind of true. Like again, you can only find so much pleasure in what you buy. Okay, I got a 20 billion in the bank. I bought every imaginable thing I could buy. Verse 12. Now, like I say, I don't have that much money, so I'm taking Solomon's word for it. Verse 12. The sleep of the worker is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich permits him no sleep. Believe it or not, this last statement here, the abundance of the rich permits him no sleep. A lot of millionaires are workaholics because literally they have to watch their wealth because people are always trying to get it, always trying to steal it. Verse 13. There is a sickening tragedy I have seen under the sun, wealth kept by its owner to his harm. The wealth was lost in a bad venture, so when he fathered a son, he was empty-handed. We see that every day, people throwing away wealth. We think about Bernie Madoff, for example. You know how people went after greed and then lost their life savings, and a lot of them were elderly. And we could go on and on with bad ventures, bad investment over greed. Verse 15. As he came from his mother's womb, so he will go again. Naked as he came, he will take nothing for his effort that he can carry in his hands. This too is a sickening tragedy. Exactly as he comes, so will he goes. Now, I remember hearing this. I don't know exactly who said this. I hear Billy Graham said it, but it could have been someone else. But he said he've never seen, a funeral hearse with a U-Haul attached to the back, carrying all of the wealth and the belongings to the grave. And that is simply true. Death is the great equalizer. Notice he said, as you come, you will go. Okay? You may say, well, but don't we dress them real nice in nice suits? Yeah, but the body decomposes. Okay. All right, let's go on. He said, verse 16 again, this too is the sickening tragedy. Exactly as he comes, so he go. What does one gain who struggles for the win? What is more, he eats. What is more, he eats in darkness all his days, with much sorrow, sickness, and anger. So, now remember the struggle for the win in other translations is grasping for the wind. In other words, like now, can I grab hold of the wind? Can I hold wind in my hand? No, you can't. Verse 18. Here is what I've seen to be good. It is appropriate to eat, drink, and experience good, and all the labors one does under the sun, the few days of his life God has given him, because that is his reward. Kind of interesting statement here. Eat. He said, eat, drink. Sorry, it is appropriate to eat, drink, and experience good in all the labor that he does under the sun. In other words, it just kind of wired in us that we work. Laziness doesn't fit in God's plan. Verse 19, God has also given riches and wealth to every man, and he has allowed him to enjoy them, take his reward, and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. Now, I know a lot of people will say, where's my wealth? Okay. When Solomon says this, God has given riches and wealth to every man. Has he? Right? And of course, what does he mean by this? That God has given riches and wealth to every man. And again, spoken from a wealthy man. And he said that he allowed him to enjoy them, take his reward, and rejoice in his labor. So is he referring that the labor itself or the rewards of labor are wealth and riches? And then how do you measure the wealth and riches? He says this is the gift of God. Verse 20. For he does not often consider the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the joy of his heart. Now, again, that's kind of very interesting here. Notice this. Is this not true? How many of us, and there are probably some of us who do, But if you're occupied with work, okay, if you're occupied with working, you're kind of not thinking about death, are you? It's only when if something happens, something tragic, something traumatic happens that causes you to stop. In other words, like now, I go to work every day. My mind is occupied with work. My mind is occupied with being home, with my wife, things like that. But just think if your life came to a stop because of sickness, things change. Interesting. All right. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.